In the chaos of a crowded ER, one decision can change a life or destroy it. When a weary, injured man stumbled in one cold night, Nurse Olivia made a choice she would soon regret. Little did she know, the man she dismissed as a nobody was about to become the most powerful figure in her world, and her reckoning was just beginning. The fluorescent lights of the ER flickered softly against the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the hum of hurried footsteps. Nurse Olivia Stinson clicked her pen with impatience, tapping it against the clipboard she held in her meticulously manicured hands. She prided herself on being efficient, sharp, and, as she liked to say, no nonsense. To Olivia, compassion was a luxury in the bustling chaos of urban healthcare, a luxury she couldn't afford. The clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m., and her shift was nearing its end. Her tired eyes scanned the waiting room, where patients slouched in plastic chairs, clutching their ailments. With a sigh, she muttered under her breath, another night of ungrateful people expecting miracles. Her colleague, Clara, glanced up from the desk. The younger nurse, soft-spoken and empathetic, had learned to ignore Olivia's comments, focusing instead on helping where she could. Clara glanced out the glass doors as a figure stumbled into view. The man's arrival was almost silent, save for the shuffle of his worn sneakers against the tiled floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but his posture was bent with fatigue. A threadbare hoodie hung limply over his shoulders, exposing a deep gash on his forearm. Blood seeped through makeshift bandages, torn pieces of cloth that had done little to stop the bleeding. Heads turned as he entered, his appearance drawing murmurs from other patients. His skin was dark, his face framed by a scruffy beard. His eyes, though weary, held an unyielding determination. He approached the front desk and leaned against it for support, his voice low but firm. "Excuse me," he began, wincing as he adjusted his weight. I need someone to look at this." He gestured to his arm, his hand trembling. Clara's expression softened. She stood. "Of course, sir. Let me." Olivia's sharp voice cut through the air, freezing her in place. "What are you doing? It's obvious he's here for attention, not treatment." Clara's mouth opened in protest, but Olivia was already stepping forward, clipboard clutched tightly. She appraised the man with a cold, clinical gaze, her lips curling into a faint sneer. "We don't have time for this," Olivia said bluntly. "The ER isn't a shelter. If you can't pay or prove you have insurance, you're wasting our resources." The man blinked, his jaw tightening. "I didn't come here for charity," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "I came here because I'm injured." Olivia crossed her arms. "And how exactly did you get injured?" she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Some brawl on the street? Or maybe you fell while loitering?" Clara stepped closer, her eyes darting between them. "Olivia, he's bleeding. We need to treat him first and ask questions later." Olivia turned her icy glare on Clara. "You don't decide how this ER is run." "I do. And I'm not wasting supplies on someone who's going to disappear the moment a bill shows up." The man's face remained composed, though his eyes darkened with frustration. "You don't know anything about me," he said softly. "And I don't need to." Olivia shot back. "We're done here." The room seemed to hold its breath. Other patients avoided eye contact, their discomfort palpable. Clara looked torn, her fingers twitching at her sides as if itching to intervene, but Olivia's authority loomed, and Clara hesitated. The man exhaled, a mix of resignation and exhaustion washing over him. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving faint drops of blood in his wake. As the glass doors hissed shut behind him, Clara turned to Olivia, her voice trembling with anger. "How could you?" He was in pain. Olivia shrugged. "We can't save everyone, Clara, especially not people who don't want to save themselves." Clara stared at her, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Maybe it's not your job to decide who is worth saving." Olivia scoffed, picking up her clipboard again. "You'll understand one day. You can't help everyone. Sometimes you just have to let them go." But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, the memory of the man's unwavering gaze lingered in the sterile air, and though Olivia didn't know it yet, her life was about to change forever. The hospital was quieter the following evening, but the sterile hum of the ER persisted like an unbroken rhythm. Olivia Stinson, sipping her lukewarm coffee, leaned against the nurse's station and scrolled absently through her phone. She had dismissed the events of the previous night as routine, a confrontation that didn't deserve a second thought. But for Clara, the encounter lingered. As she restocked supplies near the triage area, the image of the injured man's bloodied arm flashed in her mind. His calm yet pained voice echoed in her ears. "I came here because I'm injured. Clara." Olivia's voice pulled her back to the present. "Stop daydreaming and get these charts sorted." Clara hesitated, her hands clutching a box of latex gloves. "Do you ever think about the people we turn away?" Olivia raised an eyebrow, smirking as if Clara had just asked a childish question. "What's there to think about? They're not our responsibility if they can't follow the system. That man, he's probably fine. People like him always find a way to survive." Clara didn't respond, her heart heavy with guilt. She had let Olivia's authority silence her when she knew better, and though Olivia seemed content to dismiss the incident, Clara couldn't shake the unease growing within her. It was past midnight when the call came in. Olivia, still at the desk finishing some paperwork, glanced up as the emergency pager lit up with urgency. "Severe trauma incoming." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the intercom. "ETA 5 minutes." Olivia rolled her eyes. Another long night. She adjusted her scrubs and grabbed her clipboard, readying herself for what she assumed would be another routine case. The paramedics burst through the ER doors moments later, wheeling in a stretcher. On it lay a man, unconscious, his face bruised and his arm wrapped in a now drenched bandage. Blood soaked through his shirt, staining the stretcher beneath him. Clara gasped. It was him, the same man Olivia had turned away. For a brief moment, Olivia froze, recognition flickering in her eyes before she masked it with indifference. "What's his condition?" she asked curtly. The lead paramedic, sweat glistening on his brow, barked, "Gunshot wound to the abdomen. Untreated laceration on the arm. Possible hypothermia. He's critical. You need to act fast." Olivia's hands moved mechanically as she prepped the trauma room, but her mind was racing. What if he dies? Will they trace it back to me? She shoved the thought away, burying it under years of practiced detachment. The team worked swiftly, stabilizing the man as best they could. Clara, unusually tense, moved with precision, her hands steady but her eyes betraying her worry. As she cleaned the man's wounds, she noticed scars that suggested years of hardship she couldn't begin to imagine. "Clara, focus." Olivia snapped, her own voice tighter than usual. "We don't have time for this." Clara looked up sharply. "We didn't have time last night either, but you made sure of that, didn't you?" Olivia stiffened but didn't respond. Instead, she turned her attention back to the monitors. The man's vitals were stabilizing, but barely. The team worked tirelessly, and hours later, he was finally moved to recovery. By the time the sun rose, the ER was quiet again. Olivia sat at her station, her body aching from the long night. She told herself she had done her job, that the man's condition now was no longer her concern. But guilt gnawed at her, though she refused to acknowledge it. Meanwhile, Clara took a moment to visit the man in the recovery ward. His face was still pale, but his breathing was steady. She noticed his belongings, a wallet and a weathered notebook, placed neatly on the bedside table. Out of curiosity, she glanced at the wallet and froze when she saw the man's ID card. His name was Damon Caldwell, and beneath his name was the title MD, MPH. Clara's stomach flipped as realization dawned. Damon wasn't just a patient. He was a doctor, and not just any doctor. Clara remembered reading about him in an article that highlighted his groundbreaking work in public health and his advocacy for equitable healthcare access. Her heart raced as pieces of the puzzle began to align. Why was he here, dressed like that? Why didn't he say who he was? Clara stepped back into the hallway, where Olivia was now chatting idly with another nurse. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, she saw Olivia not as an authority figure, but as someone who had made a grave mistake. "Olivia," Clara said, her voice firm. "What?" Olivia asked, annoyed. "You need to see this." When Olivia saw the ID card, her face went pale. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be right." But it was. Damon Caldwell wasn't a nameless face lost in the crowd. He was someone powerful, someone who had been watching, and now someone who could demand accountability. The weight of her actions began to sink in, but Olivia had no idea just how much her life was about to change. The morning light filtered through the hospital's windows, bathing the ER in an almost serene glow. But the tension between Olivia and Clara was anything but peaceful. The discovery of Damon Caldwell's identity had shaken them both, though for entirely different reasons. Clara couldn't stop thinking about Damon's battered appearance, his quiet dignity, and his decision not to announce who he was. Why hadn't he used his credentials to demand better treatment? The question lingered in her mind, a mystery wrapped in an unsettling truth about the world they lived in. For Olivia, the revelation hit her like a thunderclap. She sat at the nurse's station, her normally unshakable composure crumbling as she stared at Damon's ID card. Her mind raced with panicked thoughts. What if he files a complaint? What if this ruins my career? Are you going to say something to him? Clara's voice broke the silence. Olivia looked up sharply, her expression defensive. Say something? What do you expect me to do? Apologize. Clara crossed her arms, her voice firm but calm. That would be a good start. Olivia scoffed, though her voice wavered. It's not like I knew who he was. And besides, he didn't exactly look like a doctor, did he? Clara's eyes narrowed. And what does a doctor look like, Olivia? Or are you just looking for excuses? For a moment, Olivia had no response. She shifted uncomfortably, the weight of Clara's words pressing down on her. As the hospital buzzed with its usual activity, the news of Damon Caldwell's arrival spread quietly among the staff. It was whispered in break rooms and murmured in hallways. The injured man from last night wasn't just any patient. He was someone. The gossip reached Olivia's ears, and with it came a wave of dread. She avoided the recovery ward entirely, delegating tasks to other nurses, but avoidance couldn't shield her for long. By mid-afternoon, the hospital director called an emergency staff meeting. Olivia entered the conference room, her stomach churning. The room was filled with nurses, doctors, and administrative staff, all murmuring in curiosity. At the front stood the director, a composed woman with a commanding presence. Beside her was Damon. Gone was the man in tattered clothes. He now wore a tailored suit, his injuries bandaged, but his posture confident. His deep brown eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on Olivia before moving on. The air was thick with anticipation. The director began to speak, her tone measured but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Damon Caldwell, our new Chief Medical Officer. Dr. Caldwell has a distinguished career in public health and has been a fierce advocate for healthcare equity. We are privileged to have him lead our team. Polite applause followed, though it was tinged with an undercurrent of tension. Olivia's hands trembled as she clapped mechanically, her gaze fixed on the floor. Damon stepped forward, his voice calm, yet commanding. Thank you for the warm welcome, he began. I'm here because I believe healthcare is not just a profession, it's a responsibility. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, dignity, and the best care we can provide. His words were pointed, yet he never raised his voice. Olivia felt the weight of every syllable like a hammer striking her chest. He knows. Damon continued, his tone unwavering. Over the past few days, I've seen both the best and the worst of what this hospital has to offer. There is incredible talent and dedication here, but there are also gaps in compassion, in accountability, and in the way we treat our most vulnerable patients. A murmur rippled through the room. Some staff exchanged uneasy glances. Others nodded in agreement. Damon's eyes swept across the audience, resting briefly on Olivia again before moving on. I won't name names, he said, his voice firm but measured. But I will say this. Change begins with each of us. We must examine our biases and ensure they do not cloud our judgment. Lives depend on it. After the meeting, Olivia lingered near the back of the room, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But Damon approached her before she could leave. Nurse Stinson, he said, his voice even. Olivia froze, forcing a tight smile. Dr. Caldwell, congratulations on your new role. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. I wanted to thank you for stabilizing me last night. Olivia blinked, caught off guard. Of course, just doing my job. His lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Doing your job. I hope you'll take the words I shared today to heart. She nodded quickly, her palms sweaty. Absolutely, Dr. Caldwell. I've always believed in treating patients with care. His gaze didn't waver, and for a moment, the air between them felt electric. Good, he said finally, because the way we treat people in their worst moments says more about us than it does about them. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, leaving Olivia standing there, her heart pounding. That evening, Olivia sat alone in the staff lounge, her coffee growing cold in her hands. For the first time in years, she questioned herself, not just her actions but the beliefs that had shaped them. Damon's words echoed in her mind, louder than any reprimand. Meanwhile, in his office, Damon reviewed staff files and policies, setting plans in motion for the changes he intended to make. Though he had spared Olivia public humiliation, he wasn't about to let her escape accountability. A quiet storm was brewing, one that would force Olivia and others like her to confront the damage their biases had caused. And as the night fell, the hospital felt different. Change was in the air, and for Olivia, it was only the beginning. The hospital was unusually quiet as the night shift began. Olivia sat at her desk, her nerves frayed from the events of the day. She replayed Damon's words in her mind. The way we treat people in their worst moments says more about us than it does about them. For years, Olivia had prided herself on her efficiency and no-nonsense attitude, convincing herself that these qualities were the marks of a good nurse. But now, the cracks in that belief were beginning to show. Damon's silent judgment haunted her, forcing her to question not only her actions but the person she had become. The next morning, Olivia was summoned to the director's office. The sterile walls and impersonal furniture seemed more oppressive than usual. She sat stiffly in the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the desk sat the hospital director, her expression unreadable. Damon stood beside her, his arms crossed. His bandaged arm was a stark reminder of Olivia's refusal to help him. "Thank you for coming, Nurse Stinson," the director began. Her tone was polite but laced with authority. "Dr. Caldwell has requested this meeting to address a matter of concern." Olivia swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Of course, I'm here to listen." Damon spoke next, his voice calm but firm. "Nurse Stinson, let me start by saying I believe in accountability, not humiliation. My intention here is not to single you out, but to address an incident that highlights a larger issue within this institution." Olivia's throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to explain herself, but something in Damon's steady gaze stopped her. "You turned me away," Damon continued, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "You looked at me, judged me by my appearance, and decided I wasn't worth your time. That decision could have cost me my life. I didn't know who you were," Olivia blurted out, the words tumbling from her lips before she could stop them. "If I had known." "That's exactly the problem," Damon interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "You shouldn't need to know someone's name or title to treat them with dignity. Every patient who walks through these doors deserves the same level of care, whether they're a billionaire or homeless." The director leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. "This is not just about one incident, Olivia. Dr. Caldwell's experience has prompted us to review patient complaints and staff conduct records. Unfortunately, your name appears more often than it should." Olivia's face burned with shame. She gripped the arms of her chair, fighting the urge to defend herself. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you didn't want to," Damon said, his tone softer but no less piercing. "You've allowed your biases to cloud your judgment, and that's something that must change." Olivia braced herself for the worst, for suspension, for termination. But instead, Damon surprised her. "You're a skilled nurse, Olivia," he said. "Your colleagues respect your technical abilities. But empathy is just as important as competence in this profession. That's why I'm giving you a choice." Olivia's head snapped up, her heart pounding. "A choice?" Damon nodded. "You can either accept mandatory retraining in patient care and ethics, along with ongoing evaluations to ensure improvement, or you can resign." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Olivia's instinct was to protest, to argue that she didn't need retraining. But deep down, she knew Damon was right. She had let her prejudices fester for too long, and now she was paying the price. "I'll take the training," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Damon nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. Because this isn't just about saving your career, Olivia. It's about becoming the kind of person who saves lives not just with skills, but with compassion." Word of Olivia's retraining spread quickly through the hospital. Some of her colleagues were supportive, while others whispered behind her back. Clara, who had always admired Olivia's technical skills but not her attitude, found herself conflicted. One evening, as they worked side by side in the ER, Clara broke the silence. "I heard about the retraining." Olivia kept her eyes on the chart in front of her. "Of course you did. Everyone has." Clara hesitated, then said, "I think it's a good thing." Olivia looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing. "A good thing? You think it's good that my entire career is under scrutiny?" "I think it's good that you're getting a chance to grow," Clara said gently. "You're a great nurse, Olivia, but you've forgotten why you started doing this in the first place." Olivia opened her mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she let Clara's comment settle, the truth of it sinking deeper than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, Damon was wasting no time in implementing changes. He met with department heads, reviewed hospital policies, and introduced new training programs focused on empathy and cultural competence. His goal was clear: to create a hospital where every patient felt seen and valued. But Damon's work wasn't just about policies, it was personal. As he walked through the halls, he saw patients who reminded him of the struggles he had witnessed during his undercover experience. For Damon, this wasn't just a job, it was a mission. A week later, Olivia attended her first retraining session. The room was filled with nurses and doctors, some eager to learn, others there reluctantly. The instructor began by asking a simple question: "Why did you choose healthcare?" The question caught Olivia off guard. She hadn't thought about it in years. Slowly, memories surfaced of her younger self, filled with idealism and a desire to help others. Somewhere along the way, she had lost that spark. As the session continued, Olivia found herself reflecting on her choices, her biases, and the person she wanted to be. For the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't an epiphany, but it was a start. And as she left the session that evening, she caught sight of Damon in the hallway. He nodded at her, his expression neither approving nor disapproving, but simply watchful. For Olivia, that nod wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, a sign that change was possible if she was willing to put in the work. And for the first time, she was. The hospital buzzed with its usual rhythm, but for Olivia, everything felt different. Weeks into her mandatory retraining, the days seemed longer and heavier. Each session peeled back a layer of her defenses, forcing her to confront parts of herself she had long ignored. The sessions weren't easy. They began with simple exercises, role-playing scenarios to simulate empathy, but they quickly delved deeper. Olivia found herself faced with stories of real patients, their struggles etched into the raw details of their experiences. Many of them were people like Damon, marginalized, judged, and dismissed. The realization gnawed at her. How many Damons had she turned away in her career? How many lives had she impacted, not through her skill, but through her indifference? One rainy evening, Olivia found herself back in the ER during an unusually busy shift. The waiting room overflowed with patients, and tensions ran hot. Among them was a man who appeared homeless, his face weary and his clothes soaked from the downpour. He sat quietly, clutching his side as if trying to hide his pain. Olivia hesitated as she glanced at his chart. The reflex to judge, to dismiss, still lingered in her. But Damon's words echoed in her mind. The way we treat people in their worst moments says more about us than it does about them. Taking a deep breath, she approached him. "Hi, I'm Olivia. Let's take a look at what's going on." The man's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by her kindness. "Thank you," he said softly. As she examined him, Olivia felt a strange sense of clarity. The barriers she had built, the ones that separated her from truly seeing her patients, began to crumble. For the first time in years, she felt like a nurse again. Damon had been keeping a watchful eye on Olivia's progress, though he never directly intervened. His leadership style was deliberate, preferring actions over words. But one evening, as they passed each other in the hallway, he paused. "Nurse Stinson," he said, his tone neutral. Olivia turned, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes, Dr. Caldwell. I heard about your work last night," he said, his expression unreadable. "It seems the training is paying off." Olivia blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment or an observation. "I'm trying," she said honestly. Damon nodded, his gaze steady. "Keep trying. Change isn't a straight line, but the effort matters." The exchange was brief, but it left Olivia feeling both exposed and encouraged. Damon's approval, or even the possibility of it, felt like a distant goal, but one she now found herself striving for. A few days later, Olivia encountered a patient who would test her newfound resolve. An older woman, Mrs. Harper, was admitted with severe complications from diabetes. She was irritable and difficult, snapping at every nurse who approached her. Olivia was assigned to her care. As she entered the room, Mrs. Harper glared at her. "What do you want now? Another nurse to poke me with needles?" Olivia forced a smile. "I'm here to help, Mrs. Harper. Let's start with checking your vitals." Mrs. Harper huffed, but didn't argue. As Olivia worked, she noticed the woman's hands trembling. "Are you in pain?" Olivia asked gently. The question seemed to catch Mrs. Harper off guard. Her expression softened for a moment before she snapped back. "I'm fine." But Olivia didn't stop there. Over the next few days, she took extra time with Mrs. Harper, listening to her complaints without judgment. Slowly, the woman began to open up, sharing stories of her life, her late husband, her estranged children, and the loneliness that had consumed her since her diagnosis. By the end of her stay, Mrs. Harper surprised Olivia with a small smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're the first person here who's actually listened." The word struck Olivia like a lightning bolt. For years, she had been too focused on efficiency to truly hear her patients. Now, for the first time, she realized how much listening mattered. But despite her progress, Olivia couldn't fully escape the shadow of her past. Damon's presence was a constant reminder of her greatest failure, and though he treated her with professionalism, she sensed the lingering disappointment in his gaze. One evening, after finishing her shift, Olivia found herself outside Damon's office. The door was slightly ajar, and she hesitated before knocking. "Come in," Damon called. She stepped inside, her heart pounding. Damon looked up from his desk, his expression calm but curious. "Nurse Stinson, what can I do for you?" Olivia swallowed hard. "I wanted to apologize for what happened when you came to the ER." Damon leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Go on." "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "I judged you, dismissed you, and treated you in a way no patient deserves. I let my biases control me, and I'm sorry." Damon studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why I didn't tell you who I was?" Olivia shook her head. "No, because I wanted to see how I would be treated as just another person in need," he said. "What I experienced that night wasn't unique. It happens to people like me every day. But the fact that you're here, owning your mistake, tells me you're capable of change." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know if I can ever undo the harm I've caused." "You can't undo it," Damon said gently. "But you can do better, every day, with every patient. That's how you make it right." As Olivia left Damon's office, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was on the right path. Meanwhile, Damon watched her go, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. He knew change didn't come quickly or easily, but he believed in the power of redemption. And in Olivia, he saw the potential for a transformation that could ripple far beyond the walls of the hospital. The hospital wasn't just a place for healing. It was a place for growth, for reckoning, and for second chances. And Olivia's journey was just beginning. Olivia's apology marked the first time in years that she felt the stirrings of genuine purpose. The hospital, once a place where she clocked in and out with mechanical efficiency, now felt like a field of opportunities, each patient a chance to prove to herself and to Damon that she could be better. But change wasn't easy. It required more than words or gestures. It demanded Olivia face not only her actions, but the ripple effects of her past choices. It began with a young woman, Sophia, admitted to the ER with severe stomach pain. Sophia was visibly anxious, her hands trembling as she clutched her medical records. Olivia noticed the tension in the woman's body as she approached her. "Hi, Sophia. I'm Nurse Olivia. Can you tell me what's going on?" Olivia's tone was calm, her posture non-threatening. Sophia hesitated, glancing around as if expecting to be dismissed. I've been to 3 hospitals this month. They all said it was stress, but it's not. It's something worse." Olivia's instinct was to rely on the usual script: check vitals, hand off to a doctor, move on. But Damon's voice lingered in her mind. How we treat people in their worst moments says more about us than it does about them. Sophia's voice trembled as she added, "They told me I was imagining it because I don't have insurance." Olivia felt a pang of guilt. She had dismissed patients like Sophia before, chalking their complaints up to exaggeration or desperation. This time, she leaned in. "Let's take a closer look," Olivia said, her voice steady. "I'm here to help." Instead of rushing through Sophia's case, Olivia stayed with her, asking questions and carefully documenting her symptoms. She advocated for additional tests, even when a doctor hesitated, citing limited resources. Olivia persisted, insisting that Sophia's pain was real and deserved attention. Hours later, the tests revealed a ruptured ovarian cyst, a condition that, left untreated, could have been life-threatening. As Sophia was prepped for surgery, tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," Sophia whispered. "You're the first person who believed me." Olivia's throat tightened. The gratitude in Sophia's voice was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the accusations she had once faced from dismissed patients. For the first time, Olivia understood the full weight of her role, not just as a nurse, but as an advocate. Word of Olivia's persistence reached Damon's ears. He approached her later that day, his expression neutral, but his eyes holding a spark of approval. "I heard about Sophia," he said. "You went out of your way to make sure she got the care she needed." Olivia nodded, unsure of what to say. Damon continued, "That's the kind of dedication we need more of here. I hope you realize how much of a difference that made, not just to Sophia, but to everyone who saw you fight for her." Olivia felt a flicker of pride, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she still had much to make up for. "I just did what I should have been doing all along," she said quietly. Damon nodded. That's what growth looks like. Not everyone welcomed Olivia's transformation. Some of her colleagues, particularly those who had shared her old mindset, viewed her newfound compassion with skepticism. "Looks like Olivia is trying to be the new Mother Teresa," one nurse muttered to another as Olivia passed by. Olivia overheard, but kept walking, refusing to let the comments shake her resolve. Clara, however, bristled on Olivia's behalf. "People can change, you know," Clara said pointedly. "Maybe you should try it." The confrontation left Olivia with mixed feelings. While Clara's support was encouraging, the resistance from others reminded her of how deeply ingrained some biases were. Change wasn't just a personal journey. It was a cultural shift, and not everyone was ready for it. In the weeks that followed, Damon began rolling out new hospital initiatives aimed at fostering empathy and equity. Training sessions on cultural competence became mandatory, and patient feedback was prioritized in staff evaluations. Damon also created a mentorship program, pairing senior staff with younger employees to encourage the sharing of knowledge and values. To Olivia's surprise, Damon recommended her as a mentor. When the hospital director approached her with the news, Olivia was stunned. "Me? Are you sure?" she asked. The director smiled. "Dr. Caldwell believes in rewarding growth. He thinks you have something valuable to offer." Though hesitant, Olivia accepted the role. She was paired with a young nurse named Maya, whose enthusiasm reminded Olivia of herself in her early years. As they worked together, Olivia found herself sharing not just technical knowledge, but lessons she had learned the hard way. One evening, Olivia and Maya were tending to an elderly man with dementia. His confusion made him combative, and Maya struggled to calm him down. "Let me show you something," Olivia said, stepping in. She knelt beside the man and spoke to him softly, her tone soothing and patient. Gradually, his agitation subsided, and he allowed them to care for him. Maya watched in awe. "How did you do that?" Olivia smiled faintly. "It's not just about the medicine. It's about seeing the person in front of you, not just their illness." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "I hope I can be as good as you someday." The words caught Olivia off guard. For years, she had been seen as efficient but cold, someone to emulate for skill, not compassion. Hearing those words now felt like the validation she hadn't realized she needed. By the end of the month, the hospital felt different. Damon's leadership had begun to take root, and Olivia found herself embracing not just her role, but the responsibility that came with it. She no longer viewed patients as numbers or problems to be solved, but as people deserving of care and respect. One evening, as Olivia prepared to leave, she saw Damon in the hallway. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Damon smiled. "Good work today, Nurse Stinson," he said. "Thank you," Olivia replied. "For everything." Damon nodded. "Keep proving it." As Olivia walked out into the cool night air, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time, she believed she was moving in the right direction. And in the quiet stillness of the evening, she made a silent promise to never again let her biases overshadow her humanity.